Hey good people, this is Ricky here for the Frugal Photographer, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Sony A58. And this is a really great entry-level camera that you can get for less than $300, and I think it's one of the best deals in all of photography right now. Let me tell you about this cool camera. So you can get it for less than $300 on eBay, which is pretty incredible. In fact, you can't even get the predecessors to this camera for as cheaply as you can get this camera. The image quality of the A58 is very good for an entry-level camera. So in terms of dynamic range and low light performance, it's comparable to what you would get from an entry-level Nikon camera, but it's much better than what you would get from a similarly priced Canon camera, or in fact more expensive Canon cameras. It has a big, bright electronic viewfinder, and there's two advantages to that. One is that regardless of whether or not you prefer optical viewfinders or electronic viewfinders, it's very big and it's very bright for an entry-level camera. So with DSLRs, because they have all that actually moving the light around business that they have to do with mirrors, they tend to make the viewfinders very small to save money. But because this is an electronic viewfinder, they could make it very large very affordably. So it's a much better viewfinder, and it's much more enjoyable to look at than what you would get on a comparable Canon or Nikon DSLR at the same price point. Now also, it being an electronic viewfinder, this is very controversial, but I am 100% on Team Electronic Viewfinder. I do not understand why people prefer optical viewfinders. And that's not to say that I don't enjoy using an optical viewfinder. If I'm doing a walk around, not serious hobby photography, I do often enjoy an optical viewfinder more. But an electronic viewfinder shows you the image you're actually going to get. And that can be a really huge deal when you're in difficult lighting conditions. And I, like many photographers, take my best images when I am in difficult lighting conditions. So, shooting at golden hour or something like that. And so having an electronic viewfinder is just a huge advantage, and I don't understand the argument that you should handicap yourself and use an optical viewfinder. So I think especially if you're a beginner, just starting off with an electronic viewfinder like this camera is a great idea. And then you'll probably be like me and be on Team Viewfinder, or electronic viewfinder, and not understand people who prefer DSLRs with their optical viewfinders.
Excuse the horrible image quality here. I am having to use my crappy camera phone, but I want to explain why I'm so crazy about EVFs. We are looking down my EVF right now on the Sony A58, and this is what it thinks the correct exposure is in aperture priority mode. So this is obviously completely wrong. So I can just dial down my exposure compensation, and I can actually see my highlights being diminished. And amazingly, I have a histogram in my viewfinder. So on the right, I can see that my highlights are being clipped. On the left, I can see that I'm pretty close to cutting off my shadows, but I'm not yet. So I can go even further to be like, this is completely wrong. And, maybe I'm not able to get the perfect exposure, but at least I know what's going to happen with my final image when I take the picture with an EVF. Whereas with an optical viewfinder, playing this game of figuring out, are my highlights clipped, or are my shadows clipped, where ought I to be, this can take a really long time, and it's a really slow and frustrating process. And if you look at my portfolio and the portfolio of many people, almost all of the images in there are taken in difficult lighting conditions like this. And so an EVF can be a huge advantage for making the images that you care about most.
So it has 15 autofocus points, which is not crazy amount, like especially with what you find in mirrorless cameras, but relative to what you'll find in the competition's DSLRs, it's either comparable or better. And the autofocus is pretty good. I had read some reviews just to see what other people thought, and some people, I've read mixed things. So some people say the autofocus is quite good and snappy, and other people have said that it's problematic and not as good as what you'll find in other DSLRs. I think it's as good as any autofocus you would find in a similar price DSLR. Like I'm using a Canon 70D to video this right now. The autofocus for that doesn't seem any different to the autofocus for this. I think it has DSLR entry level, autofocus. The autofocus is fine. This has in-body image stabilization. So For photography, that means that you can use lower shutter speeds. So shooting in low light or something like that, that can be a big deal. And that's also really nice because now you don't have to buy lenses that have optical stabilization. So you can buy these super cheap lenses and you can throw them on this body and you have image stabilization. And this is really cool because, so one of the huge advantages of shooting Sony A mount, which is the lens mount that this camera uses, is you get access to this large library of absurdly cheap, pretty good Sony A mount lenses. And you can go buy, you know, the Minolta 70 to 210 f4 for $60, or go buy the 50mm f1.7 prime for $40 or whatever. You can throw it on here and it's stabilized, and that's really cool, and that's pretty unique in the DSLR world. So this does have a tilty screen, but it does not have a flippy screen. It does not flip down, it does not flip out, it doesn't do those things. It's also not a touch screen. If you really value having a screen that you can, you know, do the whole vlog situation, what you could do is you could buy the predecessor to this camera, the A57, or the one that's one tier higher than this in the Sony lineup, the A65. Those both have screens that flip down, if that's something that's important to you. Now, this is an entry-level camera, and it has some beginner-oriented features. So, for example, it can do HDR in the camera, which I've used, and it's pretty good, actually. Like, I think it looks as good as HDR that you could do in Lightroom. And I don't think it looks super crazy HDR-y. I think Sony really did a good job implementing the HDR, and I'm really happy with it. Now, this is a really good camera for a lot of video, especially for their price point. It's not perfect, but it's got a lot of cool features. So to start with, it has a mic input, which is a big deal. That in-body image stabilization is super helpful for video. It's not as good as what you'll get from Panasonic, you know, on Micro Four Thirds. But again, you can throw any lens on here and you'll have image stabilization, which is super cool. All right, and this is me walking around, and I'm just gonna walk around quickly, and I'm trying my best to keep the camera steady, but you know, it never works out so well when you're walking. And this is with image stabilization on, and I'm going to turn it off, and we'll just take another walk around the yard real quick. All right, image stabilization is off, and I am walking quickly, but trying to stabilize the camera just as before. And I have no idea what the difference is going to be, but we shall see. Now, other nice things for video, and stills as well, is that if you're into pulling focus manually, or maybe you're throwing on manual focus lenses, you can have it show you focus peaking, which is where it highlights a color around the edges of your subject when it comes in focus. Oh, sorry, my lens is freaking out. This also has focus magnification, so you can zoom in and really check and make sure that your focus is tack sharp. So both stills and photographers and videographers will appreciate that. And it also you can do those zebra highlight warnings, so you can have the camera quickly flash when when something's overexposed. You know, like my background is here. So one of the things that's cool about the Sony A58 for video is that it has this unique technology to these Sony A mount cameras, where it's got that mirror in there that sends part of the light to the autofocus sensor. So this is not that different to how most DSLR works in photo mode. But the cool thing about this is that this is how it works in both photo mode and video mode. In other words, if you have experience using DSLRs and you've put them into continuous autofocus mode and you've shot with that, that is what this is going to be like in either continuous autofocus for photos or when in video mode. So you know already probably what that's like, and that's pretty decent. It's respectable. It's certainly a lot better than the video autofocus that you'll get from a lot of entry-level DSLRs. Now, Canon's gotten famous for its video autofocus and its 70D and its 80D, but the irony of that, of course, is that all their market share is going to mirrorless cameras these days, and the 70D and the 80D, they're not famous people don't love them because of the photo autofocus modes. People love them because the mirror flips up, it turns into a mirrorless camera, and it has extremely good video autofocus as a mirrorless camera. But basically, this gets around that problem that Canon did by creating this crazy dual pixel autofocus technology by just putting a mirror in there that's translucent that sends some of the light to the autofocus system and part of it to the imaging sensor. And so they only have one autofocus system, and it works pretty well. And relative to a lot of the competition, it works better for video. Now, the big downside for video on the A58 is that although it does have a mic input, you cannot manually choose your microphone levels. And that's a bummer because so the Canon 70D that I'm shooting on right now, part of the reason why I went Canon is because I'm interested in doing video. And so I have this external microphone going in there, and I can say, hey, I don't want your crappy DSLR microphone preamp to be boosted all the way and making it sound all hissy-like, right? So I can basically turn the gain way down and get something that sounds really good. And whenever you're using the automatic external microphone levels, it just never sounds good. Well, it's never going to sound as good. So yes, you can get this to take an external microphone, but it actually has built-in stereo microphones, and they're pretty good. And I threw in my shotgun mic, and it didn't sound that different. And in fact, there was less hissing when I was using the internal microphones. So it's kind of a mixed bag there, where on the one hand, if you just want to grab it and use the internal microphones, it's great. But if you want to be a little bit more serious, you want to up your audio production, you can't manually adjust those levels. So here we are using the shotgun microphone. So talking, testing, 1, 2, 3. I like shotgun microphones, and I'm just going to unplug it. Okay, and this is a test in the same location, but without the shotgun microphone. Now, it's super lightweight, like you would find from an entry-level camera, and I really like that. Some people prefer a heavier, more durable camera that you can use as a weapon and still have a good camera at the end of the day. I'm not into that. I like that this camera is so light. I like that about entry-level cameras. In fact, I'm planning on selling my 70D and buying a Canon Rebel SL2, partly for that reason. A 70D is a surprisingly heavy camera. Not a fan. Now, in terms of cons on this camera, there are a couple that are unique to Sony or to this camera, but for the most part, they're what you'll find on an entry-level camera. So it only has one SD card slot, which I really dislike. And it only has one dial to adjust your shutter speed and aperture. So if you're in shutter priority mode or if you're in aperture priority mode, it's not a problem. The one dial will do whichever you have selected, right? But if you're in manual mode, well, now it's a little bit of a song and a dance because, you'll be adjusting your shutter speed, and then to adjust your aperture, you have to hold down the exposure compensation button and then adjust it. It's not that big of a deal, but it is a little bit annoying. I guess I just like to have quick access to all of my controls at all times. Because it's an entry-level camera, one of the buttons down here is picture styles, which is something that you can do if you're shooting in JPEG mode to, make it look like, do selective color or, posterize or make it look like a toy camera or something like that. And I'm just frustrated that they chose to make that one of the primary controls, and I don't seem to be able to overwrite that control and make it do something useful. Obviously, I'm shooting in RAW, so it's just frustrating. The AF points, you can't move around super quickly. You have to punch the button and then move the AF point. I would like to be able to just say left, right, left, up, down, whatever, without having to push the AF button in the middle. Not a huge deal. It's just a little bit slower, but to me, being able to move the autofocus point very quickly is important. So one of the frustrations with the Sony A58 is that it does have an automatic sensor that knows when you're lifting the camera up to your eye, and it'll switch from showing you the EVF to showing you, from showing you the LCD to the EVF. But the problem is that it's just really slow. It takes like a half second or a second. I'm not sure, but it's frustrating because every time you go to lift it up to your eye for a second, you have complete black. And so what I do is there's a little button right here on the top that says Finder/LCD, and it just lets you change between the finder and the LCD. So I just turned this sensor off in the settings, and so if I know that I'm going to, I usually use the EVF. I usually just leave it with the Viewfinder enabled, and you know, I only use the back screen to look at pictures and stuff like that. But if you like to use the display, or you know, sometimes I'll tilt it out to get a shot of something on the ground, right? And then I'll just press the finder button to move it back to take pictures like how I like to. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. And also, so this is a predecessor to mirrorless cameras. So it has a mirror inside that blocks a third of a stop of light. And some people hear, I hear this all the time on the internet, oh, it's blocking a third of the light going to the sensor. No, it's blocking a third of a stop of light, right? If it's blocking one stop of light, that would be half, and it's blocking 1/3 of that. So this has, the only thing to know is that it's blocking 1/6 of the light that's going into here, and so that's going to affect like noise performance and stuff like that relative to say a Nikon DSLR that uses a comparable sensor but does not have a mirror blocking part of the light going to it. But honestly, like, it performs really respectably, given that that's the case. And also it has an electronic viewfinder, which is a pretty significant advantage in a lot of scenarios. So to me, at least, it's absolutely worth it. But if you're concerned about getting the best image quality you possibly could, that might be something that you're not interested in. But also, if that was the case, you're probably also not super interested in Canon, who is the alternative that you could go to for video. So, you know, Nikon doesn't do the video thing so well. So yeah, this is it's a really good camera. The only thing that frustrates me about it, and the reason why I've decided to sell it, is the usability. I'm just not that interested in an entry-level camera where I have to fiddle. I don't have, you know, a ton of controls. Like, so it's got this quick menu that you can go to change the white balance and stuff like that. But nonetheless, it's a little bit frustrating to me I have to come up here and press this quick menu, and then I have to go down, oh, where's my white balance? Okay, I want to change my white balance, or, you know, whatever. It's important to me to have quick access to the controls. And so I've just decided that even though this gets you indistinguishable image quality from a higher end camera, I'm interested in the usability of a higher end camera. I sometimes shoot sports and fast action things and things like that. And I definitely wouldn't use this for any professional work, like definitely not a wedding or any sort of event photography or anything like that, just because you oftentimes find yourself needing to really quickly change settings, and this isn't so much for that. But if you're just a hobbyist, if you're the kind of person who likes to walk about and take pictures, or maybe for like a family camera or something like that, this is a great camera. And again, one of the biggest advantages is it means that you get access to the wonderful Sony/Minolta lens library, and that means that you can very, very affordably do the thing that makes the largest impact to your camera, or to your photography rather, sorry, and that's to get better lenses than the kit lens that comes with it. So great camera, highly recommended, one of the best deals in all photography, but not what I personally am looking for, and I will be selling mine. Thanks for watching.